trauma that they're experiencing. I think we're here to make family happen first, and there's a lot of people who really are here as family. But most importantly, we're here as well as a Jewish community, saying that awareness about addiction, awareness of the suffering of any kind of mental anguish and disease, of trauma that steals laughter away from our lives and joy, needs to be something we are concerned about as a Jewish people. My first encounter, and I'm Rabbi Bolton of Zarua, and I welcome you tonight to this evening, this awareness evening, this commit to action evening. I sometimes like to say that awareness evening should be called commitment to action evenings, and everybody should walk out of here with one more commitment to action that helps with some aspect of what they hear tonight. And if we all did that, how amazing it would be. But this evening really was an inspiration because there are some inspiring people working to make sure that we take care of people who are suffering from addiction, suffering from all kinds of mental health issues. I first encountered some of those when I was in high school and there was no one to turn to, and friends had such issues. And one of those friends wound up in a coffin. And then I turned, fast forward to make my part short, to a colleague I was in school with, Rabbi Mark Barvitz, who some of you may know, and was an intern at Beit Shuvah, and studied Torah on Wednesday mornings with people who were either battling addiction, had completely failed to launch, to use the current terminology, suffering from mental illness and had nowhere to turn in the Jewish community, or were sentenced to Beit Shuvah instead of jail in the last-ditch hope that the Jewish community could provide an address to help them up out of that system. And when I felt the power of our tradition and Torah help someone grab on for a moment to the ladder that could pick them up any given morning to get them into the next therapy, to get them into the next appointment, to get them into the next session, to get them into thinking about their lives in a different way, I started to think about how, on the whole, the Jewish community did not have so many ladders available. There were not so many first aid squads in this vein, and we needed to see those develop. And that was only going to happen if the Jewish community was more aware, and people took the risk of creating these programs. And tonight, we have people who are risking sharing emotional turmoil. We have people here who are risking investing in this process of saying the Jewish community has a responsibility and obligation through Bamidbar wilderness therapy to create the program that will help make a model for other kinds of programs like it. And the medical model that we'll hear about at the end of the presentation will help us put this into a context, but not the only context. Spiritual and Jewish family-oriented assistance, along with the medical assistance, along with the supportive programs like this, all have to come together in order to really uplift the souls who are suffering and who are broken by some of what we're going to hear about tonight. It's my honor to introduce our panelists. Susan Zilberman, first in the middle, is a congregant at Zarua. We immediately connected at the table about Jewish tradition and all that until we got to the point where we made the connection that this was an issue, these were matters we cared deeply about, and she had a personal story to tell, and I'm not going to tell you any of that. She'll tell you directly. Brave and courageous, and thinking forwardly about what the Jewish community and the world ought to do for folks who are suffering. Jory and I had the great chance to talk. Founding director of Bamidbar Wilderness Therapy Program, not only about addiction, but all matters of mental anguish and illness and failure to launch, and so much that wilderness therapy can help with. And it's a delight to have you here. And I'll recognize Rabbi Eliav from Iraqis, where this program really was envisioned and launched. It's wonderful to have you here, and Rabbi Mitch Cohen of Ramah is next to Rabbi Eliav, and it's fantastic to see you here as well. And Dr. Michael Grody is on the faculty. Forgive my looking at my screen, but I couldn't print this out in today's world. He is board certified in psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry. He's on the faculty of, what's the New York Presbyterian Hospital?
Yeah, Weill Cornell Medical
Weill
Center.
Cornell Medical Center. And let me tell you that his bio reads with lots of fantastic details, and he's expert in pediatric pediatric psychopharmacology. He's received a graduation award for excellence in psychiatry by the Brooklyn Psychiatric Society, and he participated in research on the molecular neurobiology of memory processes at the laboratory of Dr. Eric Kandel, the 2000 recipient of the Nobel Prize. So we have experts here, we have dedicated souls here, and without any further ado, I'll just say that it's time for Jewish addicts, it's time for Jewish alcoholics, it's time for those dealing with depression and mental illnesses to be able to be public and to get the support and help they need from their family. Our first presenter will be Susan.
I think I have a pretty loud voice, at least my daughters say I do. So I'll try without the microphone, and if you need me to use it, please just let me know. Last year, Rabbi Bolton addressed the large congregation that was gathered together for the high holidays on the growing problem of addiction. I then went to speak to the rabbi to find out more about the Bamidbar Wilderness Therapy Program and see how we could work together to raise awareness. Rabbi Bolton has put this panel together, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to participate. As a parent, I've always believed that my responsibility was to keep my children safe. When my son Greg died of a drug overdose in 2008, that belief was really shaken to the core. The first thing I'd like to do is tell you about Greg. So, Greg was a big, loud, adorable baby, a sweet, active toddler, a fine, hardworking student, always on the honor roll, a good athlete. He was voted most dependable by his high school class. He was a son, a brother, a grandson, a friend, and a kind, funny, sensitive, intelligent young man. So how did Greg come to struggle with substance use and abuse, to be addicted, and to die? My understanding of his journey is this. Greg started to smoke marijuana in high school. He went to college, and he tried, and then he continued to use cocaine. He started to take opioids, oxycodone and Percocet, and benzodiazepine, Xanax, which were all amazingly readily available on the internet. He was an expert at hiding his drug use. His grades were good, but during college his behavior started to change. At Syracuse, his behavior became erratic, and he was often angry, sometimes for no reason, it appeared. He saw therapists, but drugs were not mentioned. His grades remained good, and he had many friends. One of my favorite lines that one of his friends told me is, "Everybody on campus knew Grossman." He was just a great all-around kid. He graduated, left Syracuse, and moved to Philadelphia, went to work as a real estate analyst. He advanced at work, and his moods became worse. In order to handle the stress of his work and his regular anxiety, he took Percocet to get through the day. And sometime around the end of his third year at the job, he called and said, "Mom, the company's relocating and I'm coming back to New York." I was still unaware that his drug use was taking over his life. Until 6 months later, he called me and he said he had a problem with drugs and needed help. What I find truly amazing, and you may be asking yourselves, were they close? Was I spoke to Greg every day. I thought we had a pretty honest and open relationship. How hard it must have been for him to hold his life together, to function at work, to sort of maintain his relationships, while he was spiraling downward in his addiction, and worst of all, wasn't sharing it with anybody. In April 2008, he began his efforts to stop using drugs. He went to 2 rehabilitation facilities and finally a dual diagnosis facility. Each time he seemed to move further away. He ended up in Manchester, New Hampshire. The impact on our family was unbearable. He was craving the drugs. He lashed out at all of us all the time. And I lived in constant fear that he would relapse, which I've now learned is a normal part of addiction and recovery. I was panicked that he would relapse, and I tried frantically to read and to learn all I could about addiction. Then in September, he left the last facility, came back and moved to an apartment in New Rochelle. He was planning to start a new job on October 13th of 2008. And on October 8th, he was found dead in his bed in his apartment of an overdose of oxycodone, cocaine, and Xanax. My story of Greg's young life is a total contradiction to his illness and his death. How does a happy, healthy child grow into a young adult who tries drugs, a young man who becomes addicted to these drugs and dies at age 26? When Greg died, a friend of mine, whose son also died of an overdose, sent me a card with a really simple message. It said, "There's light at the end." 9 years later, I can say there's light, and there's hope, and there's work to be done. My family remembers Greg by keeping his memory alive and by raising money to help young adults who struggle with addiction. The community, our community and the Jewish community at large, can play a supportive role both to those who've lost loved ones to addiction and overdose, and to those who are still struggling with addiction. What is our responsibility as parents and as a community? How can we keep our children safe and help those who are struggling with addiction or trying to help a loved one? We can educate ourselves and our family. We can raise awareness. We can refuse the stigma and support effective treatment in legislature. Specifically, I looked for some important ways that people struggling with addiction can be helped. It is said in the Mishnah, whoever saves a life, it is considered as if he saved the entire world. First and most importantly, people struggling with substance use disorder have to stay alive long enough to get treatment and to benefit from it. Relapse is a natural part of recovery, and Greg's last relapse took away his hopes and ours that he could stop using drugs. Since his death, progress has been made in saving lives. Naloxone, or Narcan, which I now carry at all times, is a drug that can reverse an opioid overdose. It can be easily administered in the form of a nasal spray, yet it's still not available enough or affordable enough. We can do our work to make this drug affordable and available so that no one else who overdoses on opioids needs to die. Also, when Greg overdosed, the people he was using drugs with were afraid to call for help, which is probably why they dragged him back to his apartment. In 2011, New York State passed the Good Samaritan Law. It allows people to call 911 or any other emergency medical service without fear of being arrested, whether they themselves are experiencing a drug overdose or they're witnessing somebody else overdosing. Another recently approved treatment is medication-assisted treatment. As part of a comprehensive treatment plan, it's the gold standard for people with an opioid use disorder. By giving the patients drugs that help them manage their cravings, reduce their use, and reduce the chance of overdose, medication-assisted treatment can be very effective. It is, however, not yet widespread due to the limited availability and the stigma, believe it or not, of treating addiction with drugs, which is something I can't understand. Mental illness and addiction must be treated like any other medical condition. 50 to 70% of the people using and abusing drugs have some sort of mental health disorder. By enforcing the mental health parity law, insurers can provide benefits for mental health and addiction treatment that are equal to the treatment of any other medical disease. Health insurance also has to be made available to people who struggle with addiction. People who need treatment have to have access to health insurance, especially Medicaid. Insurance will provide treatment not only for people in our own community, but for those states that are worst affected by the opioid crisis. Another thing is that people struggling with addiction need to stay out of jail. Arresting people who are using drugs and putting them in prison certainly stops them from recovering and will not help them. Many states, starting with a police chief, I believe in Gloucester, Massachusetts, are offering treatment in place of arrest for those who ask for help. Repeated arrests and jail time have never reduced substance use. And now for the doctors in the United States who are prescribing opioids for pain management at higher rates than any other country. Today I read a statistic, and I put it in here, so I might have to read it again. But basically, more than 80% of the world's supply of pain pills are being prescribed in the United States. In some towns, there have been more prescriptions written and filled than there are people. Medical professionals and medical students need to be educated about the addictive property of opioids and trained to prevent their misuse. Opioids are highly addictive, and when patients run out of prescription drugs, where do they turn to? Lethal street drugs like heroin and now fentanyl. Legal action is currently taking place against the giant pharmaceutical companies who are much more interested in selling drugs and making profits than prescribing them responsibly with concern for the possibility of addiction. And now closer to home, early prevention, both at home and schools, is essential. We must educate ourselves about the drugs that are going to be offered to our children and learn ways to help our children develop self-esteem as well as their communication and their decision-making skills. And finally, stigma, the most horrible word that there is when it comes to drug addiction. The stigma that surrounds drug addiction and drug use must be eradicated. Addiction is a disease, and people have this disease must be treated with the same concern, understanding, and empathy as any other person with any kind of illness. Kol Yisrael aravim ze lezeh. All Jews, all people of Israel are responsible for one another in every way for every problem, including the illness of addiction. When Greg was involved with 12-step programs, he called me and he said, I need to connect with my Judaism. I said, what happened? He said, the 12 steps keep speaking about a higher power, and I believe if I study my Judaism, I'll find my own higher power. Through the amazing kindness of Levi Krinsky, a young Chabad rabbi in Manchester, New Hampshire, Greg started to study Judaism and work with the rabbi while he was in New Hampshire. As a community, we can support, and we, our family, have started to support Bamidbar Wilderness Treatment Program that helps young people struggling with addiction to heal through connection to their Jewish identity. I really want to take the time to thank you, Rabbi, for working with me and allowing me to work with you on this growing problem that has personally affected my family and is a real danger to every community. Thank you, Jory, for coming and telling us about Bamidbar, and Dr. Grody for talking about addiction as the illness that it really is. And to each of you who came here tonight to listen, thank you.
The format we're going to use is we're going to hear from each of the panelists first, and then I'll ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up to have a dialogue in community. And Susan, I want to say that it's been a blessing to Zarua, our community, and I think now even beyond, that you're willing to find the strength to share that story, that you're an advocate up on the facts, and suggesting some ways that we can all take action, messaging we should make and could make to legislators, professional physicians, to become our own advocates, our best advocates for our children. And hopefully we'll see that you're back on the blogosphere. I know that you're out there, and if you do the Google search, you'll find a wonderful entry that states a few years ago some of what
The Mama blog.
we heard today. But I want to encourage you in public to continue doing the Avodat Kodesh, the holy work that you're doing with Greg's Gift, and as an advocate for all the children and all the community members who need our support.
Thank you.
Delighted to turn to Jory to talk about Bamidbar Wilderness Therapy. And I have to say again, when I heard that this was an endeavor Ramah was taking on, that Eliav, Mitch, Rabbanim, and the Jewish community was willing to support, first of its type, I did make it immediately the topic of my high holiday address. I believe after that there were no less than 1 million of people who came to me and said in their own ways, this is my family, this could have been for my family. And then another 1 million over the last year, and especially when we announced tonight, people who sent either regrets they couldn't make it or that they are here. So I wish you strength to know about this, and may you become a model for the Jewish community and others looking. And it's been a delight to get to know you and see that your personal investment in this, in addition to the team at Ramah, is making it so possible in the months to come. Jory.
Great. Rabbi Bolton, thank you for having us here tonight. Susan, thank you for the courage in sharing your story. It's so important for us to be open and to increase dialogue about mental health issues and addiction in the broader Jewish community. And that first step is speaking and being able to share with the community so that others can grow and learn and can have the opportunity to be supported through that community. And thank you, Dr. Grody, for being here as well. So I want to start by sharing a little bit about myself and why I'm here and speaking to all of you today. When I was in high school, my brother was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. He was struggling with addiction, and he had overdosed and attempted suicide many times. He was in and out of the hospital, and I didn't think he would live to see me graduate high school. I was lost and afraid and self-destructive, and with the way that my world seemed to be falling apart, I also wasn't sure if I would get to high school graduation myself. Around the same time, in addition to everything going on with my family, I also lost 2 peers, one to an overdose and another to suicide. I was struggling to deal with that appropriately, and in April of my 15th year, just before Pesach, my parents enrolled me in a wilderness therapy program. At 15, I left my parents' home, a land that I knew and was familiar with, and entered into the unknown. For 2 months, I wandered the deserts of Utah. I learned to build a fire without matches or a lighter. I made a backpack out of choke cherry and leather, and I cooked over an open fire with 8 other young women who were also struggling at home. I slept in the rain and the snow, facing the deep internal brokenness and displacement that I felt defined me. In this environment, surrounded by the beauty and the austerity of the desert, I began to appreciate that my pain, my unanswered questions, did not make me weak. They were an essential part of who I am, of who I was, and they are what defined me, though not in the way that I had first thought. As many of you know, in January of this year, Ramah in the Rockies is opening Bamidbar Wilderness Therapy, the nation's first Jewish wilderness therapy program, serving young adults who are struggling with trauma, mental health issues, substance abuse, or a failure to successfully launch into adulthood. So what is wilderness therapy, you might be asking? Why can't this type of treatment take place in a town, in a city? There's a Hasidic tale I want to share to help answer this question. A boy goes into the woods every day, and his father, a bit concerned, asks him, "Why do you go into the woods?" The boy matter-of-factly states that he goes to find God. His father looks at him and says, "That's wonderful. I'm so glad you're seeking opportunities to connect with God, but don't you know God is the same everywhere?" The boy turns to his father and he says, "I know that God is the same everywhere, but I am not." The wilderness is humbling. It invites vulnerability and decreases distractions. Free of the constant cultural stimuli that is today's world, Bamidbar students will have a fresh start. Our program will use wilderness and adventure-based experiences as a vehicle to promote therapeutic growth in a process that is guided and directed by licensed mental health professionals. Program activities include backcountry travel and wilderness living, during which time clinical assessment, treatment planning, and interventions take place. Students will have individual, group, and family therapy, and will participate in activities that foster social growth and positive development. The wilderness and group living experience provides a safe and controlled opportunity to apply therapeutic concepts to real-life situations. So why are we starting a Jewish wilderness therapy program, you might ask? What's Judaism have to do about it? Let's take a second and let's look at last week's Parsha. So, Lech Lecha begins with a journey. At God's command, Abraham sets forth and he goes out from the land of his father and all that he knows to journey towards an unknown destination, a land that I will show you, as God tells him. So throughout the Torah, our ancestors journey. They go, holach, many places. In Genesis, we see deep family brokenness and displacement. In Exodus, there is freedom from slavery in Egypt. In Numbers, Bamidbar, the Jewish people wander the desert, and in Deuteronomy, they enter the Holy Land. Each of these books and the people within them follows a journey. Why? Why are there so many journeys in our tradition? Why does Abram have to leave and face trial upon trial before he can grow and develop into Abraham, the father of a nation? The first sentence of this parsha gives us a little bit of an indication of why these journeys are necessary and why they are positive. Lech Lecha is so often translated as go forth or get on to thee. The first word, lech, is straightforward. It's the imperative verb of the form. It's the imperative form of the verb to go. It's a command. Go, get going. But what about lecha? God has already told Abraham to go, so why isn't lech enough? Lecha is reflexive. It means to yourself or for yourself. And Rashi interpreted it as go for yourself or go for your own good. We can also read this as go into yourself. It's not just a physical journey that God commands, but it's also a spiritual journey as well. In Pirkei Avot, we are told that Abraham was tested 10 times, and in last week's Parsha, we saw many of those tests. Abraham is exiled from his home, he faces famine, war, and family brokenness. When speaking with a friend about that journey, about Abraham's trial, she made a great point and said, can you call it a journey if you're not tested? Without a test, then it's just a vacation, right? Throughout the Torah, we see our forefathers face trials. We see them struggle, grapple to find the correct answers, and oftentimes we see them fail. The Torah presents full characters, their good side and their bad, and shares stories of their struggles, their trials, as they grapple to find their way in the world, their personal meaning, values, and purpose. Biblical characters are flawed because, guess what? They're human, just like we are. Abraham's journey wasn't just physical. He went forth into the unknown, both physically and spiritually as well. You may have noticed that when I said that when I first mentioned Bamidbar, I said that it was the nation's first Jewish wilderness therapy program. While this is the United States' first wilderness therapy program for Jewish young adults, this is by no means the first Jewish wilderness therapy program. No, I would say that Abraham really is the first wilderness therapy participant, and throughout the ages, we have relived that narrative again and again. Our ancestors were good at finding self, purpose, and community in the desert. Why, as we face our own struggles in this day and age, should we not as well? When I was 15, I went into the wilderness, into the Midbar. While the wilderness therapy program that I attended was not the least bit Jewish, my identity as a Jew was fundamental to what I gained from that program. Mitzrayim, Egypt, means the narrow place. In each generation, we are supposed to celebrate our liberation from Mitzrayim. We were slaves, but now we are free. In every generation, we are bound. We are held back by external events and by internal beliefs, by depression, trauma, addiction, and immobilizing self-doubt and fear of the unknown. And every year, we have the opportunity to explore those things that hold us back and to say, no, I will not let this stop me from living my life to its full potential, from living the life that I want to lead. As I struggled with the death of close friends, the fear of losing a loved one, and my own debilitating depression, and as I celebrated Passover alone in the wilderness, this concept of Mitzrayim profoundly impacted my journey and experience. Our tradition provides such powerful guidance, support, and strength. And at Bamidbar, we will use the strength of the Jewish tradition as the foundation of our program, the framework that gives greater depth to the experience. Through Jewish metaphor, storytelling, values, and practice, we have the opportunity to transform an already powerful model to provide a uniquely Jewish pathway to recovery for those struggling within our communities.